Nick, thank you so much for joining us. I thought I would kick off with a bit of a joke. A lawyer walks into a bar in Tokyo. Could you maybe finish it for me?
Yeah, and starts a comedy club. And why not? No, Don, it's part of what I'm focused on with my most recent venture, which is how do we stop people telling lawyer jokes? It's like for some reason, I know we're going to cover AI. I actually had a wonderful experience with, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent already, but I was using ChatGPT, and then I was also using ChatGPT through Bing. And so you ask ChatGPT for 10 lawyer jokes, no problem. So there's 10 lawyer jokes, come straight up. And then I went on to Bing, and using ChatGPT via Bing, I said, can I have 10 lawyer jokes? And it came back and it said, unfortunately, we are not able to provide content that would upset members of society. And I'm like, wow, that is fantastic. That it's the trust and safety people have decided to protect the lawyers. That would be a first.
I love it.
That is fantastic.
And
But
so,
yeah,
that journey, how did you go from, I think you finished law in 95, and then how do you end up running a comedy store in Tokyo?
Yeah, so I had 4 years out of law school here in Sydney, and then went to Japan, and I was working in my day job as a lawyer in Japan, and then I'd always done stand up and improv and stuff. So I started a comedy club at night in Japan, and that actually went pretty well. And then that sort of took me off on quite a tangent where I was invited to write a show for Japanese television, Tokyo Broadcasting Corporation, and it would focus on me, and they were convinced I was going to be the Seinfeld of Japan. And who was I to say no to such a noble idea? And so we worked on that, we shot it, we released it as a pilot, they showed it twice, and unfortunately it didn't work, so ended up not being the Seinfeld of Japan, but took other avenues. But yeah, it had always been an interest. I had a deep sort of personality flaw that I'd always wanted to be a Hollywood studio executive.
Well, you talk about Seinfeld. I always take him down to look a bit more professional, but that's who normally lives behind me. You can see that there. So I
Kramer.
do enjoy the Kramer.
You know what? You could leave it up, and I think that would add to the professionalism. I think people would always appreciate it.
One of the interesting things is that business continues to flourish. And
Yep.
one of the patterns we often see is that when founders or people that have been heavily involved in something leave, often it doesn't survive. So it has survived. Any insights as to why it's continued to flourish once you've moved on from it?
Yeah, so it is now 30 years that it's been going, and it's probably it's something that I'm very pleased with how it worked, and actually the tale of how it's flourished and what it's done. Because and I was speaking to some younger folks the other day, and they were talking about how they didn't like the idea of leadership or management because you had to deal with people, and I completely get that, because that's always there's an added hassle to that. And what I said to them is just think about when you do things like this, when you get to the tail end of your career, which is where I'm at. Still got a few years left, hopefully, but you look back on the people who you've influenced over that time, and it's a cause of great satisfaction. And if I look at the comedy store, so when I put that together, I needed an improv group, and so I could do it, and I found a couple of other people, and then I needed a fourth, and there was a guy from America, Midwestern America, very funny fellow, but had never done any improv or stand up, and I convinced him to join the troupe. He was gay, and so he joined the troupe, and then we had at the club the first ever Japanese and English language improv tournament, and he met Jun, his now life partner, at that event. And this is back in the mid-90s, and being gay in Japan in the mid-90s wasn't a super popular thing necessarily, and so they found each other there. They were amongst the first to get married under Japan's same-sex marriage legislation, and became quite a well-known couple in that area. And now have a thriving business as actors in Japan and then still run the comedy clubs. The reason for the success is that I sold it to people who were brilliant, and that was very lucky because they are wonderful people, wonderful entrepreneurs, and great creatives.
It's a fantastic story. I'm curious. A mate of mine, Wayne Farrell, he's a founder now turned investor, and he signed up for a comedy course, and it scared him to death, but he absolutely nailed it, and he's quite talented at it. And one of the things that he said was it's made him a better communicator.
Right.
And I'm curious, and I've heard this from others, but would you prescribe comedy as a way for a founder, an early founder, to become better at communicating and perhaps even leading?
Yeah, I've not really thought about it. I see it more as therapy, frankly. It's it's a way of just getting out what I'm thinking and see whether any of it resonates with the audience. But I think what it does is it gives you a lot of time on your feet in front of an audience in what is quite a risky endeavor. The idea of getting up in front of people and trying to make them laugh is a ludicrous proposition, but it does, it certainly focuses the mind. And what over time you then hone your set and you get better at it and you get better at your messaging. And maybe the one thing that I would say that you absolutely take out of it as a communicator is you become very sensitive to what the audience response is.
Mm.
And you are actually listening to the audience, albeit you're speaking, and it is very much a one-way communication apart from dealing with hecklers and so forth. But you are very perceptive because you are constantly trying to appease them and make them laugh. So you're very conscious. So I think it's very good on the EQ side of things. And I think the other area where it's great is you learn to hone a message. Your wording becomes very tight around those sorts of things. And I would just, if people are fearful of things, I'm a big believer in doing things that push us to an area where we're a little uncomfortable. It's well worth doing and just seeing, because the kick that you get out of it is incredible.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
And you talked about there doing things that make you a bit uncomfortable. In going through your history and then some of the interactions we had when we were doing due diligence on an investment we were going to make, one of the things is you seem to have this pattern of wanting to disrupt from within. And say LawPath as an example, you are a lawyer. Lawyers have ways of doing things. They have revenue models. They have all of those aspects. Yet you created LawPath to be able to almost transcend that, it seems, to give better advice to people that couldn't maybe afford it or access it.
Yeah, excuse me, sorry. So with LawPath, that was a very clear decision to try to fill a niche that frustrated me. And I'm a lawyer. I had been in a .com. I was chief operating officer of a .com during the .com boom and bust in LA. And so I had unfinished business with the internet. And so 10 years ago with LawPath, I wanted to solve the problem that frustrated me, which was I knew a lot about the legal aspects of starting a business, structuring, how you would go about putting a business together, getting funding in, doing shareholders agreement, etc. And I would always speak to founders and I'd always give them an hour free, but that sort of felt like a bit useless because then they would have to try and muddle through putting employment agreements together and so forth. And it just seemed like there was this massive inefficiency because lawyers are very expensive, particularly when you're a founder. And so LawPath was designed to focus on an area of what we call micro law, which is really companies that have between 1 and 30 employees. And a lot of those companies have very similar needs. And so LawPath is designed to solve those needs and to really focus on how can we help the small business get really cost-effective legal advice. And we now incorporate 8% of Australia's businesses. Then if you incorporate with us, there's a strong chance you'll take our subscription offering. Then we've got a marketplace. So it's now, when I started it, you're supposed to have the audacious goals. And so I said that we would help 1 million small businesses get access to cost-effective legal advice. And I got to say, it's a bit awkward when you start talking like that because people are not super enthusiastic about those sorts of claims. So you get a lot of naysayers around that. And I know there was a lot of negativity in some quarters around what we were proposing to do. I'm pleased to say just a couple of months ago, we passed 400,000 customers and we look like we're on track to hit 1 million.
Well done.
Yeah.
And that, when you say you get those naysayers when you create a target like that or express a goal like that, do you feel like that's quite an Australian thing? Is it nuanced to our culture?
Yeah. So I spent 4 years in LA and I went to film school there and then worked in Warner Brothers and then worked as Chief Operating Officer of Spike Networks, and we listed that. And I got to say, at no stage in the US did I ever feel like anyone thought what we were doing was a bad idea or shouldn't be doing it or whatever. There is very much it's a very specific aspect of American culture. They are super enthusiastic people, and that's a very exciting place to do business. Still is, I think. In Australia, I think there's a feeling that people have, which is what they're doing, what he's doing or she's doing, that will never work. And I don't think it should stop anyone. It's just something you manage through, I think.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt or impact. Of course it does. We're all human, but there is an Australian element. I think over the last 20 years, with the rise of Canva and Atlassian, and there's a real sense of can-do in the startup market these days. And so I think you find your tribe and you just focus on the support you get in the tribe. So it's a much bigger tribe now than it was even 10 years ago when we started LawPath.
Yeah.
And you were a co-founder of LawPath, and you just said there we started LawPath, but I don't think you're operationally day-to-day involved in
right.
LawPath, and that's something we don't often see, co-founders being able to do that and then transition really well. So could you talk us through that genesis and today?
Yeah, so I'm a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright, and so the arrangement that I had with Norton Rose was that I was allowed to found the business, and so I basically had seen a similar business in the US called LegalZoom, and so I basically started it with the guys from Pollenizer. I don't know if some of the listeners might remember, so Phil Mall and so forth. And so Phil is a co-founder as well. So we started off and then brought in very quickly thereafter some wonderful co-founders as well in Dom Woolrich and Tom Willis, who are the day-to-day running, and they've been in that business now for 9 years or more and are brilliant and have done just an incredible job. So effectively, we just together with Phil, I got it out of the garage at nights and on weekends, and then it's Dom and Tom who run the show, who do an amazing job with that business, and so I'm not involved operationally.
I think that's just a fascinating. Correct if I'm wrong. There's a vibe that the driving factor for you was helping those end customers, but needing to control it or be at the top of it, or the impulses that sometimes we see, you're able to transcend and say, hey, I'm going to get it off the ground. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to bring other people and let the baby be taken by others. It's not common.
Yeah, I guess I haven't really thought about it from that point of view. It's just, I'm driven by curiosity. I feel like I was curious to see if we could make a difference. And using MVP methodology, we didn't start out. My first day wasn't let's build a website. It was, I had a view that we could make legal more cost effective for small business. And so I sent out an email to 2,000 small business owners and said, if we build a website like this, would you use it? And we got a decent response. It was, direct mail responses alike, very low, but based on what we thought was a reasonable number, it felt like that was reasonably solid. And so that validated that hypothesis. And then we've just continually gone on. Yeah, the idea of controlling it or being CEO, that's not something that I have been interested in. I'm very pleased to see the business thrive under Dom and Tom running it there.
But even just what you did there, normally the traditional pattern is, I've built this thing, and I've put all this effort into it, and then I'll go and find the customers. Whereas actually going out and doing that early product market fit, that gave you the conviction to go and do that. Whereas often what we find more in the angel investing and early stage is it's a product in search of a problem rather than the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yes, no, and that a lot. And so I was very lucky with Phil Mall, who's now at Main Sequence, but back when Pollenizer was really at its peak and it had incubated a number of companies, they were very strong on the MVP model, and that you couldn't take another step unless you'd validated your initial hypothesis, and that whole idea of what is the minimum amount that we can do. And I've taken that in. So for 4 years at Norton Rose Fulbright, I looked after technology and innovation group globally. And as part of that, I was involved in a lot of innovation projects. And I tried to make sure so we're 7,000 people around the world, so it's a decent sized business, a lot of lawyers, and they're not super keen on change, generally speaking. And what I saw in that, we get back to that idea of innovating from the inside, is a lot of innovation projects within larger organizations often get greenlit out of the strength of the reputation or the power or perceived power of the individual or individuals who like the idea. And so I think by putting in a more rigor around assessing what is the problem we're trying to solve and trying to make sure that problem's big enough that we could be bothered, because there's lots of problems we could solve. What you want is a problem that is really worth investing time in, and that's often difficult for people because people come up with great ideas and there is a problem, absolutely, but A, how big is that problem? B, who's going to pay for it, pay for the solution? Yeah, it's really, I was very lucky to have MVP drilled into me, and so brought that back into Norton Rose Fulbright, and now that's what I teach in my bond program, where I'm trying to help lawyers innovate.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. And yeah, it's interesting. Phil's a good friend of Tribe. He was on our investment committee before Main Sequence became too much of his time, and from the Pollenizer days. And I really feel like it is a bit of a loss to the ecosystem that Pollenizer ended up shutting down ultimately. But Nick, before we get into the work you're doing at Bond, I'm actually curious what you were just talking about there in terms of, often we see with these types of disruptions or new approaches, there's a lot of pushback from the incumbents in the industry. Did you experience a lot of that from other law firms or other lawyers pushing back on you existing and potentially moving in on their turf or disrupting their business at all?
So that's with the LawPath business.
LawPath.
Yeah. So I think no one really cares, because the great part about the LawPath business is I think it's serving a market that has not been served, because not a lot of law firms are super excited about micro businesses because they don't have necessarily a lot of money to pay for legal services. In many respects, the proposition was there is a latent market which is not serviced at all right at the moment. So what was happening is, if you're a small business person and you needed to start up or whatever, you need an employment agreement, what they would do is they would just Google employment agreement and then use that employment agreement. We've done is, it's basically $100 a month or thereabouts, you get unlimited access to 500 legal documents and how-to guides and so forth, unlimited calls with lawyers. And so what that does is, it, for a very low cost, and it's a real 10x value proposition. If you think about, so they have this guarantee that they can call a lawyer and it's not going to cost any more than subscription. Whereas if you call a lawyer at any time, you could be paying $500 or more per hour. So we've turned that more into, for $1,000 a year or thereabouts, you've got access to lawyers. So I don't know that it's, I think there were people who scoffed at it in the early days for sure, but I don't think anyone particularly cares what we're doing, because we've got a very clear niche which we service, I think, pretty well. And so it's a niche that's it's very hard for a law firm using traditional hourly rate models and so forth to actually work in that. And then we have the marketplace. So we work with probably 30 or so law firms. There's more, and so they will bid for jobs on that marketplace as well. So in many respects, we've created opportunities. They're for jobs that are more significant than what we can answer out of the subscription offering.
Yeah,
and I'm one of the 400,000 happy customers. The last 4 property transactions that I'd done that needed a special purpose vehicle, just log on to LawPath, just put it all together, got the shareholder sorted. Like on one, we had to do the contract that day. So I think I logged on to LawPath at 7 a.m., got my company sorted, signed the contract, deposits paid. Like you just, beforehand, I'd be waiting for the accountant, and then there'd be a fee for that. And whereas I still will then, once registered and I've gotten myself into suitable trouble, then it gets passed to the accountant. But the fact that you can do it all at your fingertips is just a game changer in terms of speed. And I even had to update the shareholders, and someone at LawPath helped me do that. It's really good.
Oh, that's great. That's all Dom and Tom and the team. They are delivering on that vision on a daily basis. They are just fantastic. I'm delighted. I hear that so often, and I think we're it's some crazy number. It's like 10,000 5-star reviews on Google and so forth. So yeah, it's just great, because it's just frustrating, I think, for smaller business folks to not be able to get that access to that. Obviously, we've got AI coming, and there might be a change in that model, but I think for the moment, it's looking pretty solid.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic service. So I'd love to hear more now about your breakthrough lawyer program that you're running through Bond. And I must say, when I saw that title, because I studied law, I lasted 3 months in a law firm and saw the partners and their life, or actually lack of life, and thought that is not aspirational. And actually, our analyst Jack is also saved from a career in law, having studied law at Bond.
Okay.
So yeah, love to hear more about this and the ambition you have behind it.
Yeah. So Aaron, your story and Jack's story and others is very common. And if I look at my career, so I was a lawyer for 4 years in Sydney, then 3 years in Tokyo, had the comedy club, then gave up the comedy club, went to US, went to film school, went to USC Film School, so that's George Lucas's film school, so that's a pretty decent film school. Worked at Warner Brothers as a creative executive, so not a lawyer. Then I was chief operating officer of a .com, which listed. That was going to be never work again money. That didn't happen. We bombed out. And so by sheer economic necessity, as my equity was going south in that business, my interest in the law rekindled at a similar rate. And so I came back to law, and that was in 2002. And so I came back to Australia and really focused on doing what I'd seen a bunch of the West Coast law firms do, Wilson Sonsini, Fenwick, Cooley, those sorts of folks, which is focusing on technology companies, technology law. And that focus has been an incredible benefit to me over the last 20 years now in this practice here. And I often say I would take my worst day as a lawyer over my best day at Warner Brothers. And the job I had at Warner Brothers was an epic job. So I was working on the development of the West Wing, and we had ER in production and so forth. So externally, that looked like an incredible job. There would be thousands of people who would want that job, and it was a job I thought I'd always wanted. And I was miserable in that job because it didn't work for me. It just didn't tick the boxes that I needed ticked. So I've ended up having done a whole bunch of things to get out of the law, ended up being a lawyer and weirdly being super content and having a very fulfilling practice and life in the law. And what concerns me is the stats on lawyers like literally hating their job. It's very high in the profession. And you also get things like, what's the worst thing that could ever happen to a lawyer who's a parent? That their kid decides to do law. Like there are so many people who are lawyers, and yet all of them say, "Oh, I don't want my kid to do law." And I feel like that's sad because I do think what we do is helpful. I think every day, and the way mindset thing, I think and the hours are difficult. Let's just take that on board. That's not super great part of things, but what we do, we've got access to this information, which most people don't have access to. So it's a very privileged position. And the way that you can help people is really quite remarkable, and I find that quite rewarding. And so what I did, so Bond very kindly made me an adjunct professor, and so I've been researching sort of high performance in lawyers and professional services generally over the last couple of years. And I'm looking at high performance not just in terms of people who make a lot of money, but really people who come through, have a long career, and are very happy at the end of it, or are content, because I don't think happiness is necessarily something it's a tricky thing to aspire to, but I think being content with your career and your life is a really good thing to aspire to. And so from that came the Breakthrough Lawyer Program. So we just had the first 30 go through the cohort. It's 4 steps to being a better legal leader and innovator in your organisation. And so the first part of it is really around what the future trends are that will impact lawyers. Then we do some pretty usual sort of coaching, so personal and leadership style coaching, and then get into the 10 habits of highly successful lawyers, and then finish off with an innovation project. And because most lawyers can't or are scared of innovation, we're very good at doing things from precedent, and we do not like to fail. And so using minimum viable product, each of the cohort come out with an innovation project, which is a low cost, high impact innovation project that they can bring back to their organisation. And the great part about law is there's so much low hanging fruit in that space. You can really make quite a significant change in the services that you deliver to your stakeholders or your clients by changing a couple of very simple things. And that's been, so the first cohort's gone through, the feedback's been awesome, and Bond now want to take it to the US and the UK, Canada, so we'll see how we work on that. But it gets down to this idea of having purpose, but also with innovation, just focusing on something that's sort of low cost, but that makes someone else's life better. And it's amazing, things like people summarising difficult to read policies. So every large organisation has a sort of cupboard full of policies that no one ever reads, and they call up the lawyers to do it. So just doing simplifications of those so that you cover that in one page, and then people can read that because it's simpler. We did a wonderful innovation project where we took for Oricon, this isn't part of Breakthrough Lawyer, but something we did at the firm. We took Oricon as a big engineering firm, have 7,000 people around the world. They had a 25-page employment agreement. They wanted more innovative, so we reduced that to a 3-page cartoon strip, which we think is enforceable, and we're very comfortable with it. So it is remarkable what you can do in the legal process as a professional if you focus on the customer rather than just thinking, we've always done it this way, so we're always going to do it this way.
Can you offer that as a service, legal agreements into cartoon strips? Because I'd love that for some of our investment docs and agreements.
Yeah, no, it would. So we have looked at it. It's hard, it hasn't quite jumped the fence into that area. So we have done it a lot with policies. I think you need a visionary organisation that's prepared to go that, and you probably where it works well with employment agreements. So everyone hates reading their employment agreement. No one thinks that is a good time at all. And if it's 25 pages, that's the last thing you want to do. And so it works well with that because it's a broad base. Whereas I think with investment agreements, probably you've got a much smaller readership base, and they probably do have to read through the drags and the tags and so forth.
But I think one of the people, I think, can be a bit hard on the legal profession, not understanding that the consequences of a lawyer not getting it right, it affects them deeply, but also, more importantly, the client. And if that is the structure that you're living in, by definition, then you do actually have to make sure that things are checked and things are detailed, and anything you can do to help simplify that is important. But we've got to not lose sight of the fact that ultimately you're here to stop them either getting into trouble or protect them from trouble.
Yeah, and I think it's a matter of also how you deliver that message, because clients are different. Some clients are like, we want to lock this thing up tight. There's nothing short of 100%. We want every risk mitigated. There's not many of those clients these days, frankly. So long as you can identify the risks, and that's one of the great joys of the job, where and probably getting a bit older too, where you can actually look at a transaction, a piece of tech M&A or something like that, or a tech investment, and say if I'm acting founder side, say to the founders, look, here are the risks here. It's a pretty aggressive term sheet. the reality is it's a USPE term sheet, so we're not going to get much movement on this and this, but we'll get some movement on this and this. And so I think it's about when you're a lawyer, being able to give that pragmatic advice. It's informed rather than being just very structured, and also because the client will absolutely pay attention to what you say, and that can be difficult if you've got a lawyer on the other side who's perhaps less familiar with those sorts of agreements or something, and then everyone gets very tense and you get into a sort of quite an aggressive, not aggressive, but just a standoff. So I think it's important to know what the issues are. I don't think not every risk needs to be mitigated. Every risk needs to be discussed. There are risks that people are happy to take on.
And so, segueing a little bit, you've started to spend a lot of time in the digital world, artificial intelligence. How do you see that evolving? And as an example, I look after an environment where we do lots of leases. I look at that and say, surely soon the lawyers redoing some very basic leases is going to disappear, some basic property stuff. I think we've seen some change happening there, but yeah, what's your perspective on where things are going, and more broadly than just law?
Yeah, no, happy to talk about it broadly. Maybe if I start off just with the law and then we can expand the discussion. But I love, Goldman Sachs came out and very helpfully said that 44% of what lawyers do can be done by machines. And so lawyers need to run for the hills because the machines are coming. And there's no actual basis for that. Their research on that was unfortunately not super deep. And it plays into quite a popular narrative that what lawyers do is that we are some sort of automatons who just grab the old agreement and stick a few different names in there and then roll it out and then issue the bill. And that's actually not what we do. There is, we'll talk about the leases stuff. The commodity work where you're not adding value, that's a real problem. And AI will munch that up. It's already done a lot on the conveyancing stuff. You don't want to be in that commodity area as a lawyer. You want to be in an area where you add value. And I think that lawyers do add value in this sense that I see what we do as relationship counseling. If you think of any transaction that you've been in or any dispute, actually what's happening there is it's about a relationship between two entities or multiple entities. In an M&A deal or an investment deal, you're trying to come together. It's a more positive environment. But effectively, even if it's bigger organizations, big banks or government or whatever, that still manifests as individuals. And what lawyers, where we can really excel, I think, is seeing that as trying to bring folks together and get to an outcome. Because the reality is no one enjoys the legal process. It's not something that business people go, oh, great, now we get the lawyers involved. But that's not really something you hear. So how can we get people to an outcome which is acceptable as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible? So I see law as being a really good, frankly, look, we've been around since for a very long time. I'm very bullish on the future for law and lawyers because the world's getting more complicated and lawyers thrive on complexity. And to give you just a sense of the AI impact, because I know there's the Goldman Sachs view of the world, but I've got one client that's a very big consumer-facing client, lots of customers. One of their problems now as a result of AI is that the number and the complexity or the sophistication of the complaints that they're getting from their customers has gone through the roof. So they're now getting 14-page customer complaints that are beautifully written that raise very relevant legal points that have all just come out of ChatGPT. And so that's funny in one sense because, oh, who'd have thought? But that's a real issue to be managed by the organization. They've now got many of these coming through every week, and you can't just let them sit. You have to actually deal with them. So in some respects, AI, the democratization of legal analysis through AI has actually just created more work for lawyers. So I do think I think there's real benefit, there's real opportunities there. And also to perhaps, Aaron, some of the reasons that you would have seen as a reasons to leave the law, particularly that sort of less enjoyable work around the analysis piece and so forth, or just the endless grind of reading documents and so forth, I'm confident that quite a bit of that might be automated and we can focus a little bit more or a lot more on the advice that we give to our clients. So if we look at the Excel spreadsheet, didn't mean the end of accountants. It just meant that accountants don't have to spend as much time doing that sort of pretty ordinary bookkeeping type work. And so they can give better advice to their clients. And then the ability to then use Excel to flip the way that you view your business on through a variety of different prisms, whether you view it by product or by geography or by demographic, is incredible. And that's all being created by spreadsheeting. And so I do see similar sorts of things here. I think it will be a very powerful tool, but I do think there's still going to be lots of opportunities for lawyers. And I guess, Don, just to your point around leases. So I do think that's an area that's ripe for it. Anywhere where it's a scale issue, scale of similar type documents, then where lawyers aren't really adding much value, then I think, yeah, there's definitely, and there's been moves already, and I think the recent wave of generative AI will do this. Things like due diligence, which I know will be important to you guys, I see that being taken over by generative AI. It's unbelievably good at summarizing documents and finding where the issues are. Yeah, I would put it there. So that's the legal stuff. Happy to talk more broadly if you like.
And there was a article this week put out by Dan Van Boom of Capital Brief that he had interviewed Cal Henderson of Slack.
Yeah.
And that article was quite interesting to me because it separated changes in computing and technology versus changes in society. And what you just described there is maybe changes in a profession. But do you see that professional changes in all industries bleeding into society as a whole with some of the futurist work that you do? Or is it really just going to be a series of professions that become more efficient in what they do, but society as a whole carries on?
Yeah. Look, I think society carries on for sure. I don't think the machines are coming for us, and not in any time soon. I think if we look at the way I see AI, I think we've got a great productivity tool. If you look at there's some very interesting research done by a couple of the universities. One was done on writers, the other was done on programmers, and they saw an uplift of between 35 and 50% in the productivity when they use generative AI. I think that's incredibly powerful if you get that level of uplift. The issue will be how far can that go? But I think it will be a productivity enhancing tool. There will be some dislocation of jobs, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as significant as some of the more sort of worst case scenarios. Where I think there is a societal change coming is this combination of the screen interface as the key tool for us interacting. And I know that there's a whole range of people who are like, we all need to get back to the office and we all need to start having more coffees together and going camping and like the good old days and get out there on our bicycles and ride around and kick a football. So I feel like that's a romanticized view of the past, which bears not very much relevance to the present. Because I think if I look at, say, 40 years and below, that's a very different approach to human interaction to the way that people who are older than that would think about it. And these are generations who've had screens from very young ages and are very used to interacting in a screen-based environment. And there's some great research done by an organization called Coefficient Capital, and it's legit research. And they asked a couple of fascinating questions. The first one was, did you make your best friends online or offline? So where did you meet your best friends? Now, for someone older than 40, most people be like, offline, of course. Whereas between 35 and 40% of the 10 to 40 year demographic met their best friends online. And so even I mentioned this the other day to a group of ladies, and one woman said, yeah, no, I met my best friend on Bumble. She's 27. And Bumble is a dating app, but it also is a friend finder app. So she found someone who's now her best friend. They then asked, do you feel more yourself online or offline? And they came back, that 10 to 40-year-old demographic, 45% of them felt more themselves online than offline. So I'm a big believer in this whole idea of the screen interface is where our lives will spend the majority of our lives. And so we will build relationships on that. So where I see AI intersecting with that is through chatbots and so forth. So I do think that the bot capability is getting incredible, and where that ends up and the relationships that we start forming with bots and so forth that we've met through the screen interface, I think will be very interesting. I see there's a massive societal change there in terms of our relationship with bots. And there's something that I do in my futurist presentations where I actually take an organizer, I ask people who could fall in love with a robot, and I take them on a journey by showing them a few things. So in the beginning, no one puts their hand up because everyone's like, Nick's a weirdo, and no one's falling in love with a robot. In the end, 95% of people put their hands up, say they're in love with a robot. And then at the end, I get the whole audience cheering when a robot beats up a human, which is not something in many Hollywood movies. I think the way we think about bots and so forth is going to profoundly change in the next 5 years.
I feel like this could be an entire podcast episode itself.
I've got a lot to say on that subject.
Charlie Booker's excited.
Yeah. But I saw that blog post on your site referencing the 45% that identify with their online identity more than their physical. And at first I was shocked about it. But then I thought of my children who are 10 and 12, and that is a lot of their existence. So it makes a lot of sense. And I guess one of the things I'm looking at with my kids is what advice do I give them for their future career in the world that they're going to be entering? And keen to hear your thoughts on what are those human characteristics maybe that they should be focusing on developing in the world that they're entering into.
Yeah. So and my kids are a little bit older than yours, but it's something I've thought about it, and I feel like it's been driving me in my futurist endeavors. So I think the biggest thing that in my work at Bond, what I found was a big driver of success and satisfaction for professionals was curiosity. And I'm a big believer that we should try to raise curious people. So be curious in things, try to understand things, because when you are curious and then you find out you're on a journey of discovery, it's a very fulfilling journey. And Einstein has this great quote where he said, I have no special talents other than I'm passionately curious. Yeah. And then Robin Denholm, the chair of Tesla, was speaking at South by Southwest just last week. And the question was asked, because Robin started as an accountant and now she's one of Australia's most successful technology folks. They asked, what is the thing that you attribute your success to? And she said, curiosity. So I feel like, and that, at one level, that's quite trite to say, just be curious. But actually, it's what's driven me to do all different things. I've never had any particular career plan. It's a pretty random assortment of things that I've done. But it's always just been driven by, I'm just interested in that, wonder what would happen. So I think being curious, I think there's no doubt that interpersonal relationships are still going to be critical. The machines are not going to take over everything. How is it possible that we still have travel agents? We've had 2 decades where you can book travel online, no problems. And in 2020, 1/3 of the travel booked in the US was done by travel agents. So there is still going to be a need. And I think that we should focus on how can we personalize an experience. So there'll be some things that customers won't want to deal with humans on, but there'll be other things, and law is one of those. Travel booking is clearly another one of those. How can we make the human experience better? And then I do think leadership. I think we should focus on, and I see leadership as really just trying to, and once again, this sounds incredibly trite, no, I do apologize, but it is trying to help other people to achieve something, and that's I think the critical part of leadership. So they're the sort of 3 things that I focus
on. Nick, have you got a hard stop at 10, or you got a few minutes?
I do, yeah. Unfortunately, I've got another call. Apologies.
We really appreciate your time today. You're still on the tools, helping founders, investing. How do they get in contact with you, and so you can serve them?
Yeah, sure. No, we're always happy. And as I say, I do, and I may live to regret this, but I'm always happy to have a chat to particularly founders at no cost, just to give them some ideas, because I know even at the early stages, it's brutal. It's very difficult to get an idea out of the garage. You can just contact me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. I'm a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright, but yeah, just hit me up on LinkedIn, and I would be very happy to just give some thoughts on a non-charging basis. And then obviously at Norton Rose Fulbright, we have a revenue model which has served us well over the years. I'm very happy to help. My area is I just do technology, M&A and investment work. And yeah, if there is, the opportunity to help with either investment or a piece of M&A, that is what I do every day, and very happy to help out if I can.
Awesome.
Yeah, fantastic, Nick. You've managed to get me excited about law again, so it could be a
Sign up to the program, Aaron. You'll dust off that law degree and jump straight back into it. Well, thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you reaching out. Hopefully that was of some value. And yeah, let me know when it goes live, and I'll support it on LinkedIn and stuff.
Yeah, curiosity, but also always there to help and assist others. Yeah. Those two traits are amazing. So thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Aaron. Have a great day.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
He's awesome.
Yeah, what a legend.
That was fun.
No, well, I first found Nick when we were doing DD on Canopy, because Canopy obviously had a channel partnership deal with LawPath, and as soon as I reached out, was all too willing to help. And then we had some conversations that demonstrated this wasn't your average lawyer, but I know the work. We didn't get a chance to talk about it on the episode, but as an example, he is a non-executive director of the Sydney Film Festival, gives his time to that. He's a non-executive director of the Vodafone Foundation, which supports smart technology for a healthy Australia. And since 2002 has donated $26 million to a range of causes. He's a non-executive director of the Garvan Research Foundation, which is leading medical research into the area of genomic medicine. He's an author, and I know that he absolutely is passionate in helping early stage businesses. Yeah,
2 top-selling books on Amazon around disruption, and also appeared in a Woody Allen film. So an all-round interesting character.
Legends of the ecosystem. He's right. Those people that are really curious, that can defend against those initial all too human impulses of sometimes not liking change, or this isn't for me, or looking down your nose at something. If you can transcend that and go, actually, I might be wrong, I might be able to improve here, what can I look at? Those are the impulses that lead to people that can ride the wave, and those that can't get left behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that, this is yet another evolution of technology. But it is interesting, the counter, right? Because you referenced throwing stones, and if you think Stone Age become Bronze Age, where we're firing bullets, which became the Information Age, which is then we're attacking each other, and now we're entering AI, and the fears of people like Sam Altman and Elon Musk that we are about to have AI thrown at us as attack weapons, combined with some sort of Boston Dynamics robot. The other side of this is a scary thought. But I love Nick's positivity and reframe around a lot of those pieces he discussed, and particularly how it will change the demand side of a lot of these things, like he was referencing in the legal profession particularly. But yeah, in many ways, the human stays, the tools change.
Yeah. The spreadsheet didn't kill accountants. Xero and all the accounting systems, but they move up the value channel.
Yeah.
And for us, I think we've said it in a few episodes, we're probably less focused on trying to find the AI tool to invest in, just because we just are never going to be able to compete with the sheer amount of capital. But investing in the founders and the companies that are using AI tools and can demonstrate an ability and a culture to constantly learn and change. And this was the right tool, now we're moving to this. But ultimately their focus is delivering a valued outcome to a customer, and the tool is just a stepping stone. Those are the founders that we're seeking to back and support.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding where the value lies. Interesting times ahead.
Yeah. All right. We'll get this live, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah. Thanks all for tuning in.